I knew NRL had State of Origin, but I never knew the AFL had State of Origin. So I'm going to learn something new today.
Competition between the Australian states began in the 1800s, with the first match played between Victoria and South Australia in 1879. Victoria won the game 56-3, and so began a 100-year period of dominance for Victoria. In the 1880s, more teams joined in state competition, with New South Wales and Queensland going head-to-head in 1884, Tasmania taking on Victoria in 1887, and New Zealand playing New South Wales in 1889. Western Australia wouldn't play their first game.
Sorry, did they just say New Zealand? Since when has New Zealand had AFL teams? Do they not? They don't have AFL teams anymore, I assume, or do they just have that the local level? Someone's got to explain that. Someone has got to explain about New Zealand having a State of Origin / AFL VFL team, Aussie rules team. Please let me know.
In New South Wales in 1889. Western Australia wouldn't play their first game until 1904. In 1908, the first interstate carnival took place, with teams being organised into two separate groups. Victoria, South Australia and WA were in Group A, while Tasmania, New South Wales, Queensland and New Zealand were in Group B. Victoria went undefeated through the competition. These carnivals would continue for many decades to come, but following this first carnival, New Zealand would no longer take place. In the mid-1970s, there had been a significant push for a true State of Origin competition, where players would be selected based on which state they came from. The first of these matches was played in 1977, after 2 years of negotiations between the WAFL and the VFL. Western Australia won the match by 94 points. State of Origin continued throughout the 80s, but the end of the decade saw radical change in the Australian football landscape. In 1987, two non-Victorian teams joined the VFL, the West Coast Eagles from WA and the Brisbane Bears from Queensland. To represent its more national status, the league was rebranded to the AFL, Australian Football League, in 1990, and over the next 7 years the league would see continued expansion, with two South Australian teams and another West Australian team joining the AFL. Suddenly, interstate matchups were happening every week, and the novelty of State of Origin was wearing off. The players weren't willing to risk injury, and coaches were more interested in keeping their focus on the AFL season. In 1999, the last AFL State of Origin match was played at the MCG between Victoria and South Australia, in front of a crowd of just 26,000. State of Origin was officially dead.
I can sort of understand that with the expansion of the AFL, I can completely understand why actually State of Origin becomes a little bit meaningless, because where you've got the team, the Fremantle Dockers, for example, they're playing Melbourne Demons or whatnot, and the different states now have teams to represent them. So I can sort of understand. I think it's just disappointing that Aussie rules is an Australian sport, that it's not really played anywhere else. Now I know, for example, some Aussie rules is played over in the UK, over here, but very rarely, and the standard is probably dreadful in comparison. So I think I would wish that it was a bigger sport in other countries so that you could have international matches. That is the ideal situation for someone like myself. Being able to see England versus Australia in Aussie rules, that would be incredible. I know they've done things similar, but it's not very, I don't know, it's not to a high standard, is it? It's not like watching football where you've got the World Cup. Rugby, union and league, you've got the World Cup, because it's a sport that's played everywhere. And I think it's a shame that that's missing in Aussie rules. 9 years later.
In 2008, the AFL celebrated the 150-year anniversary of the sport. As part of the celebration, state football made a one-off return. Initially, the idea was for a State of Origin carnival, with the majority of states represented. That concept was eventually scrapped, and instead the AFL held one all-star game between Victoria and the Dream Team, which was made up of players from all other states. Needless to say, the non-Victorian states were not happy about this. Victoria went on to win the game by 17 points in front of a crowd of over 69,000 fans. No further state representative games have been played in the 11 years since.
So that is something you could possibly do instead of an international. Now, if you think, if Australia is the size of Europe, the size of the United States or whatever, if you think of Europe, we have the European Championships in football, and you could almost have similar, but state-wise. You have Western Australia, South Australia, the Northern Territory, Queensland, New South Wales, Victoria, Tasmania. You could have, say, every 4 years, you could have the best of the best from each of those states, almost as a country, like we do, as said, with the European Championships or the World Cup. Have it like that, and yes, I'm sure Victoria would dominate. But I think it adds, there isn't anything better than, say, a World Cup, because your country, it's that national pride. And I'm not one for nationalism or anything like that, but the World Cup and Euros does something different to you. So I think by having a mini tournament, well, not a mini tournament, an actual tournament, say every 4 years even, like we do with the World Cup, that would bring so much to the game. You have a coach who selects the best from that area, and they've got to be from that area. If they play now in Victoria, but they're from Western Australia, then they're obviously from Western Australia. I think that would add a whole new dimension to that state pride, state rivalries, and adds a little extra to the game.
Debate about a possible rebirth of State of Origin continues.
As said, I think that would be a brilliant idea. I don't know what you guys think. Let me know if having a state cup, a state championship, so similar to a World Cup or a European championships like we have in football or rugby, I think that'd be a great idea. An absolute fantastic idea. Gives you your state pride. That's what it's about, I think. And we all know that in Aussie rules, there is that tribalism. There is that love of your team and your area that you're from. So have that. That would be awesome. Anyway, that's interesting, and it is a shame that they don't have it, but I can understand why they don't do State of Origins anymore. Yeah. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll catch you next time.